Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to 2P Press Start. I'm your host, Giant Killer, and today I'm going to be bringing you my impressions and a sort of mini review of Heroes of the Storm. The gameplay you're going to see while you're listening to me blather on about the game is some older footage of me running my very favorite hero, Falstad, on Dragonshire, along with my 2P Press Start co-host, Rex. Now, since this game was recorded, the game itself has gone through a patch or two, and the interface has improved quite a bit, so there's definitely some progress being made. But before we get right into my impressions, I think the perspective of the reviewer is important, so I'm going to start out by giving you a little bit of info about my point of view as a player. I've been a big fan of MOBAs since I got involved in the League of Legends beta a few years back. Since then, I've been playing MOBAs off and on, including some in beta, for about the last 5 years or so. Now, I'm certainly no MOBA pro, which you'll be able to tell from watching this gameplay, and I've never been a part of a competitive team or anything like that, but I do enjoy the hell out of this type of game, and I tend to get addicted to them pretty easily. So I was really excited to get my hands on the Heroes of the Storm Alpha and give the game a test run. So today I'm going to be talking about some of my first impressions of the game, from the perspective of what I'd call a casual MOBA aficionado. I guess that describes my level of experience and involvement pretty well. So let's talk about the game. The first thing I have to talk about is the atmosphere. Absolutely. I've been a huge fan of Blizzard games since Warcraft. Not Vanilla WoW, I'm talking Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. So the nostalgia value, the warm, fuzzy feeling I get from seeing all these Diablo, Warcraft, and StarCraft characters running around battling each other is incredibly high for me. I absolutely love it. As a matter of fact, there aren't many other franchises I'd be this excited about seeing made into a MOBA. The clash of some of my all-time favorite video game IPs was enough to get me excited about this game well before I ever got invited to the alpha. And now that I'm in, I can't get enough of this game. If you're a Blizzard fan and you can so much as tolerate the MOBA format, you will enjoy this game just because you get to see things like Diablo suplexing Zeratul after he gets stunned in place by Uther. And the sky's the limit when it comes to potential characters from past, present, and future Blizzard titles. Who knows? I'd go nuts if we could play as like Ragewort from Rock and Roll Racing or Olaf from the Lost Vikings. I'd buy those tunes in a heartbeat. But ultimately, that's not really what's important. The play's the thing. How the game plays is what it's all about. So let's talk about how the game plays. The mechanics seem fairly solid for an alpha build. I've seen my share of betas, and hell, I've seen actual released games that are in much worse shape than this game. Now, that doesn't really mean the game's ready to go out the door. There are definitely some quality of life perks, like SmartCast is a big example, that I miss a lot. But overall, right away the impression that I get from this game is it works well enough to play, and it's fun to play. Add to that, it's really easy to pick up. Combine all of that with the nostalgia value we just talked about, and I'm having an absolute blast. So you heard me mention it's easy to pick up, right? Well, let me emphasize that. It is really easy to pick up. And it should be no secret to anyone who's followed the Heroes Alpha at all. This is quite possibly the simplest MOBA you will ever play. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's clearly Blizzard's goal with Heroes of the Storm. It's evident they wanted to put together an easy-to-grasp MOBA that's a good introduction to the genre for new players. And I would say they have absolutely hit that mark, or they're hitting that mark. Because despite its simple introductory nature, it still managed to be a hell of a lot of fun. Heroes of the Storm is to MOBAs what Hearthstone is to TCGs. It's simple, it's easy to learn, but it's no less fun and no less addictive. The simplicity there is really one of its strengths, but you should absolutely know that it's going to be a simple game ahead of time, because if a simpler, kindler, gentler MOBA is not what you're looking for, then neither is Heroes of the Storm. But let's talk about some aspects of the gameplay so you know what I mean when I talk about it as simple. In Heroes of the Storm, once you're in a match, there's no shop and no items to buy. There's no currency to acquire from creeps or kills. 100% of your character's development within the match comes from leveling up and choosing talents. This makes it somewhat reminiscent of Monolith's Guardians of Middle-earth MOBA, which also had no in-game shop, but in that game you would equip items and gems from your collection before the game and unlock or earn them in order as you leveled up. And that's done to simplify things, to flatten out that learning curve a bit, and keep up the pace of the game. You never have to leave the battlefield to go and buy equipment. Instead of items, Heroes of the Storm has a much different system of customization. You customize your character by picking talents, choosing one talent from among 3 to 5 choices generally, mostly unique to each hero, at predetermined level intervals. So I guess that's another caveat. If you were looking for a complex itemization scheme that will really let you dive into the stats, min-max your tune, and come up with mind-blowingly creative builds that really challenge the metagame, you have probably come to the wrong place with Heroes of the Storm. But what Heroes does have going for it in the customization department is the ability to customize your character's skills. By selecting talents, you basically get to modify and power up whichever ability you like best, whichever ability you tend to use the most, whichever ability works best against your enemies, whichever works best with your teammates' abilities, etc., etc. It seems like they've done a pretty good job giving you several viable paths for each character, and it's pretty clear that the options are designed to let you tailor your character more toward pushing, toward solo fights, toward team fights, whatever works best for you and your team. And even better, you also get to choose your ult. Each character has 2 different ultimate abilities you can pick from at level 10, and then upgrade later on at level 20 if you choose. This lets you respond to the circumstances of your match, pick the ultimate ability that works best for the map you're on or the team you're fighting, adapt to counter your enemy's team, adapt to complement your team better, all that good stuff. You get to pick whatever ult is going to work best for you in that situation. Now, the ability to adapt your role in-game is especially important in Heroes of the Storm because unless you're going into the game with a pre-formed team of 5, you are going to have no idea what your team composition is going to be ahead of time. At least in the versus mode we currently have available in the alpha, players each pick their character before they queue up, and you can't change it after that. So you end up with a pretty random assortment of characters most of the time. You ever run a team of 5 AD carries? Well, you will if you solo queue. Hopefully the matchmaking system is taking roles into account somehow or will eventually, but to say that you will end up with some less than optimal team comps is a massive, massive understatement. But hey, that was half the charm of ARAMs, right? It also avoids problems like the salty Q dodge or AFK in base from that guy. And we all know that guy. He's the kid who didn't get to pick Vayne, and he really wanted to be Vayne because he's diamond on his main account, but apparently only knows how to play Vayne. But he can't because somebody else picked Vayne. So he quits. Or he rages, or he AFKs, or he trolls and he feeds. In Heroes of the Storm, that kid picks a Demon Hunter, then waits in queue until the game finds him a team that needs a Demon Hunter. So it's both a blessing and a curse, because you will end up with that kid on your team, but he's going to get to play the character that he wants to be playing, so he's hopefully not going to be sitting AFK in your base. He'll be trolling you for other reasons. Alright, so we've covered character customization, now it's time to get back into the gameplay and mechanics. And one thing that's pretty important to note for MOBA veterans is there is no last hitting whatsoever in Heroes of the Storm. This is another one of those changes that was presumably made to increase the pace of the game and encourage more of a focus on attacking and fighting other players. Experience is the only currency. It's shared team-wide, and you can get it by being anywhere near an opposing minion when it dies. So there is nothing to gain by last hitting a creep. No bonus XP, no currency, nothing. In that same vein, there's also no system for reducing or denying enemy experience or currency, because again, there isn't a currency, by last hitting your own minions or buildings. Blizzard clearly wants Heroes players focusing on fighting each other, not the creep waves. Want more evidence for that? Creeps and towers will not switch aggro to a player if they see him attacking an enemy player. So you can pretty much tower dive with impunity, but for the walls. And feel free to duke it out in the middle of a wave of creeps, because as long as they have anything other than you to attack, that's what they'll do. Alright, so with no coin shot score to rack up, how do you get ahead in a game of Heroes of the Storm? Well, it's mostly done through helping your team get map objectives, jungle creeps, and by killing enemy players and structures. Map objectives for each of the 4 different maps are of paramount importance, and teams that ignore them or don't fight hard enough for them, meaning they're either not committing enough players or coordinating well enough to get them, tend to lose horribly. The jungle creep camps are also massively useful as they give big chunks of XP to the whole team, and then they go off and try and knock down enemy towers after you beat them. So they give you some XP immediately, and they can go off and earn you even more. Add all of that together, and the result is basically a MOBA that focuses just on team fights and objectives at the expense of anything resembling a laning phase. As a matter of fact, Heroes of the Storm often has very little laning phase to speak of. Rolling team fights, particularly centered around map objectives and jungle camps, along with the roaming gank squads that tend to form, these things start early and pretty much persist throughout the entire game. The roaming 5-man ball of death strategy is incredibly common, and it works. Depending on the map, the traditional laning phase typically lasts for fewer than 5 creep waves. It's only when you've got certain enemy champs that excel at split pushing, like a Gazlo or a Murky, on the opposing team, that you see teams sometimes split up to cover their lanes. But even then, it doesn't always happen. Whether this is a metagame that's going to survive the alpha and beta into release remains to be seen, but for now, that 5-man death ball strategy is pretty much the norm. So, if you're looking for a MOBA experience that focuses on teamfights, well, then you've come to the right place, and luckily, the teamfights in Heroes of the Storm tend to be pretty fun. It's really hard to quantify this impression, but what I'd call the pacing of the fights seems just about right to me. The advantages to be gained from good positioning, good initiation, and good team compositions are about as important as you'd hope coming to a MOBA. And of course, the difference in team levels plays a big part in it too, but Blizzard seems to be making an effort to curtail snowballing somewhat, so it's pretty rare that fights are just so one-sided that they're completely unwinnable for one side. If that's happened, your team's usually done something very, very wrong in the early game. Now let's talk about the maps you'll be playing on themselves. There are 4 of them, and I like all 4 of them so far. They're all very clearly designed to get players out of their lanes and moving around the map capturing objectives. My favorite of all 4 is Dragonshire because I think it does the best job of forcing teams to control multiple areas of the map at the same time, and so I think it makes for the most interesting engagements because it's not just a question of zerging around the map in a squad of 5 to steamroll the objectives one at a time. But there's something unique and fun about each of the 4 maps, and like I said, I like them all. So, we've talked about the atmosphere, which I absolutely love. We've talked about the mechanics, which are simple but fun. We've talked about the character customization, which is different than I'm used to, but also simple and fun. We've talked about the focus on team fights, which is great as long as that's what you enjoy about MOBAs. And we've talked about the maps, which I'd say are all pretty solid. All of that put together about sums up the game in my opinion. As you may have guessed by now, if I had to pick 2 words to describe Heroes of the Storm, they would be simple and fun. Now, the simplicity is absolutely going to turn off some players, but I think it will almost definitely bring in more players than it drives off because it's aimed at engaging the casual player, which is most players. While tons of people love to watch really high-level, complex, competitive MOBA play, the vast majority of players don't play at that level and don't care to. And I think that's the kind of player Heroes of the Storm will attract. Now, if Blizzard can attract and keep a good-sized number of the casual MOBA player base, and also bring in a decent-sized number of new players to the genre as well, they are looking at a potentially massive player base for this game, and that's good for everyone who plays it. Now, there are a couple of questions that remain to be answered going forward, and the biggest ones of those, in my opinion, are, first of all, how is Blizzard going to be handling balance? Are we going to see an attempt to balance all of the heroes around a certain baseline level of power, or are we going to see a more rock, paper, scissors balance system based on hard and soft counter characters? I've always been incredibly doubtful that Blizzard can successfully manage to balance any game that doesn't have StarCraft in the title, but hey, this is running on the StarCraft 2 engine, so maybe that's a good sign, right? Alright, second, how is Blizzard going to hang on to the new MOBA players who learn the basics of the genre by playing Heroes of the Storm, but then start looking for something a bit more complex or competitive? What, if anything, is Blizzard going to offer the competitive Heroes of the Storm player base when they've got games out there like Dota 2 and League of Legends offering literally millions of dollars in prizes? And maybe the biggest question is, do they even care? If they've got a steady stream of new players coming in, do they really care about the ones who cut their teeth on Heroes of the Storm and then move on to something else? At this point, all we can do is stay tuned and find out. Well, thanks very much for listening to me talk about Heroes of the Storm. It's one of my favorite things to play at the moment, so you can expect to see some more Heroes of the Storm content coming soon. If you liked what you saw, please help my channel grow by clicking that like and subscribe button, or just by watching more of my videos. Please leave any questions or comments you have, and any requests you might have for future Heroes content in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching, everybody.
I cast my Shroud instead of my AoE constantly.
That sounds hilarious. There Uther just rode up and was like, I'm out of here.
I saw